Shana Tova, everybody, and welcome. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for your love and your concern and your prayers as I continue to recover from the injury suffered in a bad car accident a month ago on September 1st. Baruch Hashem, it could have been much worse. All my injuries will hopefully, and with God's help, heal with time. So again, my thanks for all of your correspondences, your phone calls, your cards, your emails, your text messages, and the many of you that made contributions in honor of a speedy recovery or to thank God for the miracle that he performed. From the bottom of my heart, I say thank you. So this rabbi from Los Angeles shared that in the summer of 2017, he went with his family on a road trip to Casper, Wyoming. He wanted to experience what he called the totality of the solar eclipse, those 2 minutes and 26 seconds during which the moon totally covered the sun. And he said that they viewed the eclipse together with veteran and amateur astronomers in the crowd, and they were so happy to explain everything that was about to happen. They learned more about the universe and the planetary system in those 3 hours than they could have learned in a lifetime. The astronomers told them that before you go into what they call totality, you need to have a plan as to how you will make the most of those 146 seconds. What are you going to see, absorb, and think about during those 146 seconds? And he described how the tension mounted as they counted down the seconds to when they can experience the unimaginable. With 80% of the sun being covered by the moon, they can feel the temperatures dropping and the wind picking up. At 90%, they could sense the sunlight growing weaker, like late afternoon on a winter day. With a minute to go until totality, they noticed the western horizon darkening as a giant shadow started racing towards them. And then all at once, the entire crowd roared, "Oh!" as the moon completely covered the sun. The birds went silent. Night fell. Stars came out. We were living in totality. It was the fastest, most spectacular 2 minutes and 26 seconds of my life, he said. We didn't want it to end. It was a paranormal experience, like a physical encounter with God. Everyone around us was stunned and euphoric, holding on to this surreal moment. Even veteran eclipse chasers were overcome with a sense of awe, fully engaged in the experience. And the rabbi makes his point that during that time of totality, he said the Shema right then. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He said it together with his family to spiritually lock in that moment forever and to anchor it into his relationship with God. I'll never let go of that moment. I will always thank God for it, he says. Now, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't among those who got all caught up in the eclipse back in 2017. For me, those moments came and went. But after reading this article and his description of it, I have to admire what he did with him and his family as he made it into this powerful encounter, this spiritual encounter. The truth is that we all encounter moments of awe, moments of wonder, moments of inspiration in our lives. For some of us, it's very nice. What's next? What else you got for me? For others, it's wow, that's amazing. This is incredible. This is awesome. I'm inspired. Let me take it all in, enjoy it, savor it, keep it with me for the rest of my life. And that's up to us. That's our choice, how we're going to respond to these encounters. So which one of those are you? It's up to you. You choose. We're now entering the most awesome, spectacular, and spiritual period of time on the Jewish calendar. I urge everyone listening, whether you're listening live or later on YouTube or on Facebook, to attend a synagogue on Yom Kippur. Attend in person, be there together. If you live nearby the Conejo Valley, please join us. We'll be at the Lindero Canyon Middle School in their beautiful Creative Arts Theater Tuesday night for Kol Nidre at 6:15. Wednesday morning services begin at 9:30. The Yisker service at 12 noon. The Ne'ilah service later on the evening of Wednesday at 5:15. But wherever it is that you live, any place in the world, find a place to be there for this Yom Kippur holiday. Because these moments have the potential to change us, to inspire us, to uplift us. They can empower us to live our lives on a whole new level for the entire year. The question is, will you allow it to do that for you? Will you capitalize on it? Will you key in on it? Will you open yourselves up to the experience? Will you utilize it to its fullest potential? The Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, I can provide the match, but you have to ignite your own candle, your own soul. You got to do your part. You see, this is the time when God pays closest heed to our prayers. As we say in our high holiday prayers, as a shepherd examines his flock, having his sheep pass under his staff one by one, so does God look at every soul. He counts them. He reckons them. He's mindful of them. He allocates the fixed portion for their needs and ascribes the verdict of their judgment. God cares about you specifically. God is our Father, and he loves us as a father loves a child. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Steven Spielberg's 1977 science fiction film called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's the story of an everyday individual whose life changes after an encounter with a UFO, with intelligent life from another planet. Well, the theme of my talk tonight is close encounters of the holy kind. Throughout our lives, we all have these momentous encounters with God and with our fellow human beings. The question is, what do we do with those precious, awesome, and potentially life-changing encounters? Do we cherish them? Do we preserve them? Or do we let them fly off into space as if they never happened at all? So I'll start with a story about Captain Charles Plum. Captain Plum was a jet fighter pilot for the United States Navy in the 1970s. He flew 74 successful missions during the Vietnam War. His squadron, flying F-4 Phantom jets, would take off from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. On his 75th mission, 5 days before his tour of duty was supposed to end, Captain Plum's plane was shot down over Hanoi. Plum parachuted from his plane, and he landed in enemy territory. 74 missions successful. 75th mission, 5 days before his duty was to end. He's shot down, and he's in enemy territory. He's a prisoner of war. He remained a prisoner of war for more than 5 years. He was tortured, but he survived. And after the war was over and the exchange of prisoners and his return home, Captain Plum was hailed as a hero. And then he traveled the country and gave lectures about his ordeal. One night, Captain Plum was in a restaurant in Missouri. He notices a man seated 2 tables away, and the fellow is staring at him. He didn't recognize the stranger, but it was becoming obvious that this man somehow knew him from somewhere. Finally, the fellow gets up from his table, walks over to him and says, "You're Captain Plum, aren't you?" He says, "Yeah, how do you know?" "You flew from the Kitty Hawk, didn't you?" "I did. Do we know each other?" "You were shot down, right? The parachute saved your life. And then you were a POW for years, right?" "Yeah, how do you know all this?" He said, "Because I was on the Kitty Hawk, Captain Plum. In fact, I was the man who packed your parachute, sir." Captain Plum was speechless. He stood up and shook the man's hand warmly. He wanted to thank the man, but somehow simple words of thank you seemed to be so empty compared to what he really wanted to say, if only the words would come to him. Finally, the man broke the awkward silence, and he smiled and he said to Captain Plum, "I guess the parachute worked." With the ice broken, the two men then engaged a warm conversation. And Captain Plum said, "You know, I have said lots of prayers and thanks for your nimble fingers, but I'd never thought I'd have the opportunity to thank you in person." Captain Plum left the restaurant in emotional turmoil. He couldn't sleep that night as he wondered over and over, did I ever see this man on the Kitty Hawk? And if I did I ever say hello to him? A good morning to him? Probably not. After all, he was just a sailor. I was a Top Gun fighter pilot. And he asked himself, how many hours did that man spend putting together that parachute for me? I never thought about the guys in the lower decks of the Kitty Hawk until my life depended on that parachute. It was an eye-opener to Charles Plum, but it's really an eye-opener for all of us. Let's think for a moment. Are there people in our lives, in our past, who packed our parachutes? Have we ever properly acknowledged and thanked them for the central role they played in our lives? People who gave us strength when we needed it. Parents who stayed up endless nights caring for us and nurturing us and raising us, at least trying to, while putting up with all of our antics, especially during our teen years. Doctors who nursed us back to health. Teachers who imparted knowledge. Camp counselors who made our summers memorable. We shouldn't forget these people. If they're still with us, it's not too late to afford them the honor they deserve for enabling us to be who we are, what we are, and where we are. The Torah tells us that when our forefather Jacob was returning to the land of Israel after spending 20 years in the home of his crooked and conniving uncle Lavan, a woman named Devorah passed away. Okay? Devorah, very popular Jewish name. The Torah goes on to tell us that Jacob buried Devorah and named her burial place Alon Bachus, the plateau of tears. And right after that, we're told that God appeared to Jacob again, this after a long period of time that God did not appear unto Jacob. It's this strange story in the Bible. And anytime the Bible throws a strange story at us, it's because it wants us to stop, look, and think, what's it really telling us? Who was this Devorah woman? Why did Jacob see fit to utilize her? And what does God's appearance to him right after this funeral have any connection or interaction with this woman? So who is Devorah? The Torah tells us Devorah was Meinekes Rivka, Jacob's mother, Rebecca, right? Devorah was his mother's wet nurse, Rebecca's nanny. Devorah lived in a household with some very unsavory characters. She lived next to a Lavan, next to a Besuel. But when Rivka was born, when Rebecca was born, Devorah recognized something special about this child. She saw Rebecca's godly potential and dedicated herself to developing Rivka's goodness. She didn't just nurse her and nurture her in the physical sense. She gave her spiritual encouragement and reinforcement amidst the toxic environment around them. Jacob never forgot. He never lost sight of what this woman did for his mother. And when he departed with his family from Lavan's house, he took Devorah along with them. He took care of her in her old age. And when she passed away, he eulogized her and gave her a send-off befitting a righteous woman, because in a sense, Devorah, this nanny, packed his mother's parachute, making it possible for her to become the mother of a saintly man like Jacob. When God saw, When God saw that Jacob had that level of appreciation for those that made a difference in his life, enabling him to become the man he was, God rewarded Jacob by appearing to him again. Rabbi Schneur Zalman Valenkin of blessed memory was the Malamed, the teacher, who taught Torah to the Lubavitcher Rebbe when the Rebbe was a young child in Ukraine, growing up in Ukraine. He was his Rebbe in a young grade. Rabbi Valenkin gave the Rebbe his early start in Jewish learning. Now, fast forward, when Rabbi Valenkin first came to the United States in the 1950s, his former student, his first grader, had already become the Rebbe. Rabbi Valenkin visited the Rebbe at his office in Brooklyn. Now, usually when most people had a private audience with the Rebbe is sitting behind the desk, and the visitor often prefers to stand out of respect. He's standing in front of the Rebbe. In this case, the Rebbe stood in his teacher's honor and refused to sit down unless Rabbi Valenkin would sit down. Rabbi Valenkin, for his part, refused to sit in the presence of the man he accepted as his Rebbe. So if you can picture the scene, the two men remained standing, facing each other for their hour-long meeting, each one refusing to sit in the presence of the other. Years later, at another private audience, again, Rabbi Valenkin refuses to sit. With Rabbi Valenkin being advanced in age at this time, the Rebbe didn't want a repeat of their standoff from the last time. So he said to his former teacher, more than 40 years ago, we sat together in front of one volume of the Talmud. So let us both sit together now as well. Rabbi Valenkin felt he can handle that reasoning, and the two men sat down at the same time. On other occasions, Rabbi Valenkin would enter the big shul 770 Eastern Parkway. He would try to do it quietly so that no one would see as the Rebbe was addressing thousands of his followers. But the Rebbe would always spot him in the crowd. At any time the Rebbe saw Rabbi Valenkin entering the room, the Rebbe would stand up to honor his Rebbe, his teacher. He would wait till his teacher was seated, and only then would he sit down. In 1963, when Rabbi Valenkin passed away, the Rebbe paid for his burial and for the erection of a gravestone out of his own pocket. He asked that the rabbi's children each pay only $1 so that they can participate in the mitzvah of honoring their father. But otherwise, he wanted the honor of paying for his teacher's funeral. This was the Lubavitcher Rebbe who over the years went on to study with some of the greatest Torah scholars of that era. He went on to become the Jewish leader of a generation, yet he never lost sight or failed to acknowledge the contributions of those who impacted his life from his earliest of days. Who packed your parachute? Ever stop to think? Even beyond the obvious and prominent individuals that come to mind, who was that someone who had appeared in your life in just the right place at just the right time? As much as it may have seemed like just this happenstance that this person told you what he or she told you, or did what he or she did for you, but it was a critical juncture, it was a critical moment. Perhaps that moment was a close encounter of a holy kind. Someone sent there to be there for you at a very particular time, a very particular juncture in your life. When the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, invaded Poland in September of 1939, sparking the outbreak of World War II, the Chabad yeshiva in which my father of blessed memory was studying at the time immediately disbanded, everyone for themselves. And there was no control, there was no one to direct, there was no direction to be given. It was chaos. My father recalled how during those chaotic days, people were running in all different directions. He wanted to get home, but as I've told the story many a times before, by divine providence, he was not able to get a ticket on the last train out of Warsaw to the region of his hometown. That's luckily that he didn't get that ticket, because anyone that got on that train home did not survive. And so there he was. Think of this, a 16-year-old kid, 16 years old. Those of you that have a 16-year-old son, daughter, grandchild, 16 years old. He has this little suitcase. He's all alone in the world. He's watching people running through the streets this way and that way with no clue where to go. Suddenly, out of the blue, a Jew came up to him and said, "Go to Bialystok. Whatever you do, get yourself to Bialystok." Now at least the 16-year-old had a destination. Spotting a Gentile truck driver, he asked if there was by any chance going to Bialystok. The truck driver said that he was, and for a few zlotys, he allowed him to climb in the back of his truck and ride with him all the way to Bialystok. And the rest is a long history, a miraculous history, from Bialystok to Baranovich, to Vilna, to Moscow, to Vladivostok, to Japan, to Shanghai, and eventually to America. But that first critical escape was to Bialystok. And when he recounted the story, my father said, "Who was that man? This fellow that appeared out of nowhere and told me at this critical juncture in my life, go to Bialystok." That one sentence saved my life. Because those who remained or went in other directions didn't make it. My father said he never saw that man before, and he never saw him after. But this is how things often happen. For many of us, someone who you can barely remember, if at all, plays a seemingly minor act in his one-hit wonder role. And just as quickly, he or she appears in our lives, they're gone, never to be seen or heard from again. It's as if their only purpose as it crossed paths with you was for this one-time exchange that perhaps changed the entire direction of your life. It can be the person you run into at the Kotel in Israel, the chance guest who shows up at your Shabbos table and has an idea for a shidduch, for a match, for your son, for your daughter. A fellow you hardly know who suggests you attend services or classes at Chabad, and that becomes this life-changing experience for you. Someone who has been through the rigors of life, who gives you timely piece of advice that helps you at a particular crisis that you're going through. Or someone that points you in a career choice that affects the rest of your life. In hindsight, these are breathtaking strokes of divine providence, close encounters of the holy kind. I want to tell you the story of a former soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces whom we'll call Yaron. Like many who complete their IDF service, Yaron traveled to Asia after the army before returning to civilian life. As a youngster, Yaron had attended a government religious school, but the farther he traveled from Israel and the longer he stayed away and the less observant he became, and by the time he came to India, he was totally removed from a Jewish way of life. And he traveled across the country, making new friends, taking in a very different sort of culture experience. One night, he's in a bar in Mumbai. He's eating like gulab jamins, I think is some popular Indian dessert. And he's drinking some Indian drink, and suddenly he hears the piercing sound of a shofar. Ram's horn, shofar. Thought he was hearing things. He listens more closely. There it is again. It's the sound of a shofar. He excuses himself and he runs out of the bar to see where's the sound coming from. Why is someone blowing a shofar? He knows that sound. He remembers from his school days that a shofar would be sounded to herald the coming of Mashiach. But for some reason, he pictured that when Mashiach would come, it wouldn't look like the market here in Mumbai, India. He didn't picture it that way. He searches up and down, is Mashiach here? No, Mashiach is not here. So where's the shofar blowing coming from? He hurries up to his apartment. He takes out his calendar. He looks at the date, and suddenly his heart sank because he realizes that that day was Yom Kippur. And he couldn't believe it. He sat on his bed, he put his head in his hands. How could he not know that it was Yom Kippur? No matter what, he always kept Yom Kippur. How could he have fallen so far that he had no inkling that that day was the holiest day of the year? And he begins to cry. Upon further inquiry, he later learned that the man who blew the shofar was the rabbi of Chabad of Mumbai, who, knowing that there were many Israeli backpackers in the area, was going around the neighborhood and marketplaces, blowing a shofar at the end of the sacred day so that every Jew could feel those final moments of inspiration and know that it was permissible to eat again. Yaron tossed and turned throughout the night. The next morning, he was back on a plane to Israel, determined to change his life, put everything back on track. He began a new journey, spending the next 3 years in the yeshiva. After that, he got married and went on to raise a fine Jewish family. For years, Yaron never knew the name of the Chabad rabbi who sounded the siren that brought him back to his roots. But then in 2008, the story of the Chabad emissaries to Mumbai, Gabi and Rivka Holtzberg, being murdered by terrorists, while their 2-year-old son at the time, Moishela, was hiding in a closet with the housekeeper, made international headlines. As the funeral of the young couple played on Israeli television and on media outlets throughout the world, people from all walks of life wept at the sight of their coffins being lowered into their graves at the Mount of Olives Cemetery in Jerusalem. No one cried more than Yaron, who put 2 and 2 together and knew that it was this man. This man, with his simple act of blowing the shofar in the marketplace that night, saved my life, he would go on to say. He saved my life spiritually. He had no clue what he ever did. He never met me. He never knew of what took place with my life thereafter. I wish I would have had the time in his lifetime to go and thank him. I'm sure now in heaven, he knows. Elmer Ben Dinner was a navigator on a B-17 bomber in World War II during an unforgettable bombing run over Kassel, Germany. His plane was barraged by flak from Nazi anti-aircraft guns. That wasn't unusual, he said. But on that particular occasion, our gas tanks were hit. And we knew what that meant. It was over. And yet, miraculously, the aircraft didn't explode. It made no sense. A 20-millimeter shell piercing the fuel tank without touching off an explosion. How could it be? It was only later that the pilot, a man named Bone Fawkes, found out exactly how it could be. On the morning following that bombing raid, the pilot went down to ask the crew chief for the unexploded shell. He wanted it as a souvenir for their unbelievable luck. The crew chief told Bond that it wasn't just one shell, 11. There were 11 unexploded shells that were found in the gas tanks of your plane. 11 unexploded shells, where only one exploding shell would have been enough to blast them out of the sky. This was getting weirder by the minute. When the shells were sent to the disarmers to be diffused, they opened each of the shells and found no explosive charge in any of them. They were empty, clean as a whistle, as harmless as a whistle, completely empty. Well, not all of them. Actually, one had something inside. It was a note, a piece of paper. On it was a scroll in the Czech language. So they brought in intelligence people that knew Czech, and they interpreted what the note said. And it read like this: "This is all we can do for you now. Using Jewish slave labor is never a good idea." A bunch of Jews were there putting these shells together, And they said, they're not going to put explosives in to use against the Allies. And they put this note in there saying, this is all we can do to help you now. Now, I don't know if those Jewish prisoners ever got to meet the crew of the F-17 whose lives they saved by bravely leaving those shells uncharged. Unlikely. But the point is that in addition to recognizing and appreciating those who packed our parachutes, we must always do whatever we can to pack the parachutes of others. Around 10 years ago, a man named Israel Lefkowitz traveled from New York to Cleveland to attend the funeral of his first cousin once removed, Moshe Lefkowitz. Moshe Lefkowitz passed away at the age of 97. At the funeral, Israel was asked if he wished to say a few words. And he stood before the mourners and he said, some of you may be wondering why I would travel all this way to attend the funeral of a cousin once removed who lived to a ripe old age. So let me explain. In the prayer known as Yigdal, it says, God repays one who performs acts of kindness according to their effects. What does it mean, according to their effects? It means that when God looks at our deeds, he not only repays us for the acts of kindness itself, but for all the byproducts, the offshoots, the derivatives of that simple act. Then addressing himself directly to the deceased, to Israel Lefkowitz. Israel Lefkowitz went on to say, Rabbi Moshe, 70 years ago, all my father's brothers perished in the concentration camps. Your family, living here in the United States, worked hard to try and save them, but you weren't successful, except in the case of my father, for whom your family managed to arrange an affidavit, enabling him to escape the fires of Auschwitz. I am coming here today as an ember rescued from the fire to say thank you on behalf of myself and my wife, on behalf of my children and my grandchildren, on behalf of my great-grandchildren. Ad sof kol hadoros, for generations on end, I say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you. I'm here to pay my respects today, for had it not been for your family, of whom you were the last living member, our family would not have been. You see, folks, acts of kindness are not viewed in isolation on high. They are, in fact, reckoned for the effects of their effects for all time to come. Such is the nature of close encounters of a holy kind. I'd like to conclude this evening with one final story. A number of years ago, a woman in Israel named Esther was a mother of three children. She was widowed in her 40s when her husband died of a sudden heart attack. Even when her husband Meir was alive, the family barely scraped by each month. Now, 10 months after his passing, Esther was burdened with supporting the family, caring for the children, tending to the house. She was completely overwhelmed. She wasn't making it. To top it all off, one fine day, the home's Dud Shemesh, the solar water boiler, suddenly burst and water started flooding the house. The whole apartment is flooded with water. The woman was beside herself and she had no idea what to do. She looked at her youngest son, Levi, who was then at the age of 9 years old. He had to grow up very quickly since his father's death. With the two older brothers away at yeshiva, Levi had become Esther's right-hand man. And she realized that she's leaning on him perhaps more than she could have, but try as she might at times, it was just too hard for her to keep her emotions in check. And that day, Esther just lost it. She's watching the water gushing out of the boiler, filling up every room in the house. She couldn't hold back, and the tears just came flowing down from her eyes. She collapsed in tears. She gave up. Little Levi is watching this. And he says sweetly, Ima, maybe I should call a plumber. It's a pretty good idea. Without waiting for his mother to respond, he picks up the phone book. Remember, there used to be something called a phone book where we actually wrote down phone numbers. Any one of you remember that little phone book that we kept next to the phone? You actually had an A, B, C, D, and you wrote phone numbers in. Well, there was a phone book in the house. And he goes and he looks up Uri the handyman, Uri the plumber. Uri could fix anything. So Levi dials the number and says to this Uri, there's a broken boiler and there's water coming and it's filling up my house and my mother is very sad. Can you help? Uri said, I'll be right over. Shortly after, Uri was there with his tool belt hugging his waist. He walks into the apartment. He sees the stream of water coming down the hallway from the broken boiler. His boots are sloshing through the water. He approaches the water heater, quickly reaches up to one of the valves, turns it off. At least the water stops running. And then he gets to work. And Levi is watching all of this, watching every move Uri does, asking how he can be of help. He brings some towels for Uri, and he starts the cleanup process. The entire time, the mother, Esther, is just crying away. She's trying to put on a brave face for her son, but that day just got to her. Loss of a husband, trying to raise a family, trying to figure out the income, and then dealing with this flood. Uri says, don't worry, I will help clean everything up. You don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. But Esther says, what do you mean, don't worry? I don't have the money to pay for a new boiler. What am I going to do? Uri didn't miss a beat. He right away says, you don't have to worry about that. You don't know? Don't know what? You don't know about the Iriya? The area, what's that? The municipality. They sent out to all plumbers, letting them know that all of the solar boilers on the rooftops of the apartments in this municipality are all old and defected. And they're giving out vouchers for free solar boilers so that we should know that anytime we come across one that leaked, we can get a coupon from the municipality to put in a brand new one. No charge. They're going to cover all the costs. They'll cover the cost of the cleanup. They're going to cover the cost of the new one. Nothing to worry about. Wow. Levi, a little 9-year-old, hears Uri talking. He's thrilled. He knows how much relief this is going to bring to his mother now. Sure enough, a few hours later, Uri and a helper wheels in this brand new solar water heater, and they install it. Everything is back to normal. I want you to fast forward with me 25 years. Uri, our plumber, is now in his 70s. It wasn't easy for him to get around. He suffered from asthma, and his knees gave him trouble. He wasn't able to walk without a great deal of pain. And due to his asthma, it was very difficult for him to breathe the air in his stifling apartment. His doctor encouraged him to get an air conditioner, but Uri felt that it was a luxury he simply couldn't afford. As the months passed and his breathing became more and more labored, he realized that the doctor was right. So he ordered an air conditioner unit, albeit the least expensive one available. 2 days later, the air conditioner arrives. But it wasn't the cheap model that he ordered. In fact, it was the most expensive one on the market. So he asks the installer, don't you put that in? That's not what I ordered. I ordered the cheap one. You're bringing in an expensive one. I can't pay for that. Don't install anything. The installer says, I just take orders. This is what I was told to bring here. This is what I was told to install. Or he begins to get very upset. I'm not paying for this. Who do I speak to? Who's your manager? The installer picks up his phone and he calls the office to explain the situation. You told me to deliver this, to install it. This guy's not letting me install it. So the voice on the other end tells the installer to tell Uri that the air conditioner was completely paid for. Now he's afraid he's being taken for a ride and somehow he's going to get a bill with interest. So he grabs the phone and he says, you listen here, you get this unit out of my apartment and send me the one that I ordered. The voice on the other end calmly explained that there's no mix-up, that the unit was in fact completely paid for. The voice then said, you know what, I'm going to come over to explain. 10 minutes later, there's a knock at Uri's door. It's the owner of the company. Uri says, what do you mean it was paid for? Who paid for it? The man stares into Uri's eyes and he says, the municipality paid for it. The Iriyah paid for it. Uri is puzzled. I don't know if you remember me, the owner of the air conditioning company says to Uri. My name is Levi. Around 25 years ago, you did work in our apartment. Our lives were in shambles. The boiler had broken. My mother couldn't handle any more frustration or heartache, and you knew that. And you replaced that broken boiler, and you told her some baba maisa about some municipality paying for it. I knew you were paying for it out of your pocket. But for my mother, it worked. And that was a turning point in our lives. Your kindness restored our hope. It lifted our spirits. I was 9 years old at the time, but I never forgot you. And I always wanted to find a way to repay you somehow. I had no idea where you lived. But when the order for the unit came in yesterday, I saw your name. And guess what? The municipality just announced yesterday that all citizens with asthma are to be given top-of-the-line air conditioning units for free. King Solomon writes in the book of Kohelet, cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it. Goodness does not occur in a vacuum. Every act of kindness has a way of coming back to you at one time or another, in one form or another. That's just the way it works. In fact, we're taught that in the long run, acts of Ahavas Yisrael, of care and love for your fellow, acts of tzedakah, benefit the giver more than they do the recipient. On the words of Ralph Emerson, it is one of the beautiful compensations in life that we can never help another without helping ourselves. We can never help another without helping ourselves. Little do we know which crossing of paths can be a close encounter of the holy kind, one that will impact and affect the lives of our fellow human beings and or perhaps our own lives for years, if not generations to come. Indeed, for every blessing and helping hand we benefit from, we mustn't fail to pay it forward. So we utilize this time, this holy period of time, to think of those that have been there for us. Think of God Almighty that has been there for us. Think of God Almighty that has sent the angels in our lives to be there at those critical moments, and the gratitude we have for them and how we have to now pay it forward to others. On that note, as most of you know, throughout the course of the year, there are always people in need physically, spiritually, emotionally, who come to your synagogue, come to our Chabad house, come to thousands of Chabad houses throughout the world. We can't turn people away. If they come directly to you, you need to be there to help. You know, we often, every year on Yom Kippur, we make an appeal for tzedakah. The reason we do this is because that mitzvah is so powerful. It serves as your advocate as we plead to God for blessings of the year, and every one of us can use those blessings. And so on this tradition of giving tzedakah on Conejo night, if you'd like to have us be your messengers to distribute your tzedakah to those in need, and part of our Conejo appeal to you, you can simply, after we hang up from tonight, go to our website, chabadconejo.com/appeal, and make a Conejo pledge of any amount. Now, throughout the services on Yom Kippur, there are various points during which the holy ark is opened and we all rise. The ark stands as our Shar Shamayim, as our gateway to heaven, through which our prayers ascend. And it's been our custom for decades now that we take your pledges of tzedakah and we put it inside the ark, and it remains there the entire Yom Kippur as your advocate, as your mitzvah, as your way of saying to God, thank you, and passing it forward to others, to being there for others. May God inscribe and seal each and every one of you for a happy, a healthy, a sweet new year, with all of our heart's desires fulfilled for good. We should meet many occasions for simchas, for happy occasions. I look forward to spending time with you this year, studying together, whether it's live at the Jewish Academy or it's on Zoom, taking our courses and our lectures. Please visit jewishacademy.com. It's been updated with our entire year of programs, of classes, of courses, of lectures, of workshops, of women's programs, men's programs, children's programs. We look forward to spending a year of growth, a year of learning about our heritage and journeying together. Shana Tova to all, an easy fast to all, and Gemar Chasima Tova.